Hey guys, welcome to Fallout or Lore Q&A. I know it's been a while since I've done a video, but I hope this is the sort of thing that you actually after want to see more of. So yeah, we'll get straight into it. The first question comes from someone called Nesmet, and basically he asks, how's the Brotherhood of Steel founded? Now, it all began in just shortly before the war in 2077. What happened is Roger Maxson was part of a group led by a man called Spindle, and they basically were going to Mariposa military base to go see the progress of the FEV development there. Now, when they got there, they basically found out the extent of the FEV experiments, how they were using unwilling prisoners and things like that to test it out. Spindle, basically out of grief of realising what his own country had done, committed suicide, and kind of Maxon's people looked to him for basically guidance. And from there, him and his troops declared that they were deserting the army that after realising what their country had done. It was surprising for him because he didn't get any response at all from basically from command, and it's because the war had actually started, and so they took shelter there. Shortly after the bombs were dropped, everything was done, and they scouted out, and soon enough they headed outwards and found Lost Hills bunker, and that's when they then declared themselves Brotherhood of Steel and chose to do what they could to protect humanity from kind of the instincts and kind of the mistakes that led them to the war in the first place, by kind of taking hold of technology that led to this problem. Now the next question comes from someone called Double I Smitty, who asks, what is the true purpose of the Enclave? Now the Enclave they've been basically around even before the war itself. They're kind of a secret society made up of high-level individuals in the government, even on some state level. When the war dropped, they all had places to go to, special bunkers such as the White Springs bunker, the Poseidon oil rig, and Raven Rock. They all had specific places they could go to protect themselves, with the president and his other high-ranking officials going to Poseidon oil rig. Now, the purpose of the Enclave was to kind of re-establish order and government after the war had finished, to make sure that the US didn't kind of fade out of existence and they still maintained the US. Now, when obviously the war had finished, they soon realised that humanity would have been tainted in their sense by what the war had done. So, what kind of the presidency and the kind of the people surviving afterwards said is that what they should do, or in time this is what they developed to the idea of doing, was to cleanse humanity of the impure, and people like the Vault Dwellers and the Enclave themselves would be then people to take over, and then it would be America would only be those of the pure. And then we have the events of Fallout 2 building up, and we also see this later on in Fallout 3 with President Eden. However, you still get some individuals like Colonel Autumn who didn't wish to kill the impure. He simply saw the issue that was this organisation and wished to redeem the Enclave in the settlers' eyes. Mark Piper asks, what is most powerful being in Fallout? Now, the only way to rephrase this is to decide whether you're going to for intellectual power or in terms of that of physical strength. Now, the best way to kind of, I think, address this is probably to stay on the physical side. In that case, it's obviously something like Liberty Prime. Now, we've got Frank Horrigan, who is exceedingly strong. However, Liberty Prime could probably beat him, just simply the fact that Liberty Prime is a large mechanical machine that is just immensely powerful. Now, we have a question from someone called Nep181, who asks, are all the Vault Dwellers in some way related or connected? No. Vault selection was based vault by vault, really. Each of them had different reasoning for people being picked. For example, Vault 76 was to try and pick kind of the engineers, the scientists, the people who would be the best hope for humanity at the very time. So it's not best to go saying that it's the same across and they're related anyway. It is simply to do with vault by vault what each parameters were for selection. Now I have a question from Steelhen Blunt, sorry I pronounced that wrong, who basically asks what happened to the rest of the world. Now, you have to decide on which part of the world we're talking about here, seeing as it does vary from place to place. America, as we've seen, it was right badly hit. China would have been a similar state at the very least. European countries, especially the European Commonwealth in the Fallout timeline, would have been largely hit due to basically the civil infighting they had during the Resource War. Places like Australia would have actually been reasonably unharmed, since they weren't actually directly involved and they're quite detached from it all. However, the global climate changing with radiation would have had some effect on them. Now, in addition, we also have places like Africa and Asia who would have also been hit during the Resource War, in particular in terms of countries vying to get the resources that they have. Which vaults were meant to be for actual survival of its occupants? That's a good question. Rather than just list them all, since I'm not sure if we actually have the list yet of exactly which ones were control vaults, We do know that things like Vault 76 was an example of a control vault, one that was not having any underlying motives. It was purely for the sake of keeping people protected. We know that there's about 17 control vaults, which is very little considering how many were built. However, that's just the Vault-Tec for you. And you have to remember that control vaults doesn't mean that they're there for actual survivor people. It was something for Vault-Tec to compare the other experiments against. The next question comes from someone called Definitely Will Not Will Rob, who asks, what were Richard Gray and Howard aiming for when going to Mariposa? Now, to understand this a bit more thoroughly, we need to understand who they are and obviously what led them to this event, so for what their aims were. Now, Richard Gray was originally called Richard Moreau, and he came from Vault City. Now, he was eventually removed. He was the doctor then. He got removed due to murder. And once he was exiled, he soon came upon the hub where he met Harold, Harold, as we all know and love, he became the Tree Man in Vault 3. The Harold was originally a trader there, and he had a few caravans. However, his caravans kept being attacked, and in order to figure out what was going on with it, him and Richard set out to go find out the origins of these attacks. That's when they came across the source of the attacks, which was Mariposa Military Base. So that's why they went there, to try and find out why exactly, or what was causing the attacks on the caravans. So the next question comes from someone called Robbie Christopher, I believe so, the name's cut out a bit, who asks, why are the Enclave and Brotherhood of Steel in conflict? That's a good question. The Brotherhood of Steel oppose the Enclave because they literally represent everything they despise. The Brotherhood of Steel fear that humanity will maintain their greed and the very kind of genocidal tendencies that leads to the war itself. That's what Brotherhood of Steel are trying to do, is basically is preservation for the sake of prevention, is that the war doesn't happen again by kind of removing humanity's means in order to cause a war by taking away their technology and stuff. Now the Enclave comes in representing pre-war government, but with the sake of removing all impure. It's obviously a sign that they're basically exactly what led to the war in the first place, and is why one of the reasons why the Brotherhood of Steel opposed. Now the next point is more a logical one, which is the Brotherhood of Steel would be targets by the Enclave. The Brotherhood of Steel would consist of some people in their ranks who would be slightly mutated by the radiation, and to be frank, the Enclave would want to get rid of all of them anyway. The Enclave pose as a common enemy for all in the Wastes due to the fact it threatens everyone's survival, hence why the Enclave and Brotherhood of Steel are at war, because the Brotherhood of Steel are flat out threatened by the Enclave's very nature and their very goal. The next question comes from someone called 1101 Conservative, who asks, besides the remnants, is the Enclave really gone? The answer is kind of a debatable one. Now, if you speak to people like Grand Zealot Richter in the Valhalla DLC, he'll state that the Enclave are kind of a long-forgotten memory. He used to be part of them, but they're since gone now. However, based on things like the New Vegas DLC, as well as, I believe, hints in 3, suggest that in Chicago there is actually an outpost, or at least left. But we have no real concrete evidence to believe that at least an outpost still survives or exists. Many people like myself like to believe that. However, we have nothing exactly to know that for certain. Now, the next question is probably one of my favourite ones that have been asked, which is from someone called Chapin Turkle, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, who asks, how did the USS Constitution get on top of the building? Now, that's a good question, and basically, long story short, I think it's best described by the follower X68A, who says one of the scientists in Advanced Systems tried to figure out how this boat could have ended up here. Eventually, he just gave up, which I think is a clear sign that it's one of those weird things where someone fitted some jet engines at some point on the real ship, and it somehow, when trying to launch, ended up on that building, with no real other context to suggest why it actually ended up there. But it did. The next question is a rather short one from someone called the HRISD, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, who asks, what's Caesar's birth name? Now, quite simply, it's Edward Sallow. Now, the final question I'm going to answer, because there's been so many great questions asked, and I just can't answer them all in one video, and this one's from someone called Asad Gus, who asks, how did the NCR expand so much? Now, to understand this, we need to kind of compare to other factions and really start to understand why their different methods didn't allow them to grow as fast. The Enclave, they are very selective, and they did not let anyone in unless they were pure completely. The Brotherhood of Steel were also fairly isolationist, and they didn't really trust outsiders very much. And they only let in very few candidates, usually those who survived some pretty hectic testing courses, such as going to the Glow, which they've since kind of laxed upon now. In addition, you have factions that can be compared to them, like the Legion, who assimilate and they take tribes and expand their territory right that way. I think the Legion are probably the best way to really understand how the NC are as large as they are, because they are a similar, or they're at least somewhat of similar of size. The NCR, however, kind of expanded more of a diplomatic level. They made, one way or another, they made trade deals and kind of territorial expansions by kind of making arrangements with different communities, and therefore allowed them to slowly expand and in time annex different settlements. So they didn't fight and kind of dominate tribes or settlements. Instead, they chose to take it about the route of providing diplomatic or even resources or even just firepower in exchange for basically allowing them to amalgamate them into their ever-growing republic. So that wraps up this video. Hopefully I answered your question. If I didn't, then I'll try to answer it in future videos and things like that, because I definitely won't throw them away. And sorry for the audio quality, it's been a bit messy just because I've had to use my phone, and I hope to fix that in the future. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you follow me from Instagram, say hey. If you just follow from YouTube, then say hey as well. I'm hoping to anyone say hello. Anyway, have a good day or night or whatever.